Failure. In my family, that wasn't just a word. It was my second name, whispered at dinner tables, sighed in hallways, and stamped onto every dream I ever had. To the outside world, we were the perfect picture, the Hamiltons. Our home was a fortress of pristine white columns and manicured lawns, a testament to my father's legacy in corporate law. But inside those immaculate walls, I was the single, glaring imperfection, the faulty brick in an otherwise perfect facade. My brother James was the heir apparent, the golden boy. Every one of his achievements was a headline, framed and mounted in my father's study. His first-place sailing trophies, his acceptance into Yale Law, following in Dad's footsteps, his predictable, safe, and celebrated path. My path, however, was a source of constant, quiet disappointment. I didn't want law, I wanted to build. I saw potential in ideas they saw as frivolous, in the lines of code for an app, in the business plan for a tech startup they couldn't comprehend. I remember one Sunday dinner with perfect clarity. The crystal glasses gleamed, the roast was perfect, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. My father, Robert, cleared his throat. "James just made junior partner," he announced, beaming. The room erupted in polite applause. Then, all eyes turned to me. "And Amelia," my mother Catherine said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "How is your little computer thing coming along?" My little computer thing was a software company I was trying to launch from my tiny apartment, fueled by instant noodles and a belief in myself that was eroding with every passing day. Before I could answer, my father waved a dismissive hand. "Let's not dwell on hobbies, Catherine. Some people are built for the real world." The unspoken addendum hung in the air, and some are not. I learned to swallow my words along with their perfectly cooked meals. I learned to nod and smile, becoming a ghost at my own family's table. They saw my silence as acceptance, my quietness as defeat. They had no idea it was the calm before a storm I was meticulously planning. They thought their judgment was the end of my story. But really, it was just the beginning. It was my father's 60th birthday, and the house was overflowing with the kind of people who defined our world: judges, surgeons, and old money socialites. I had just lost everything. My startup, the little computer thing, had crashed and burned 2 weeks earlier. A key investor had pulled out at the last minute, and I was left with nothing but debt and the hollowed-out feeling of defeat. I walked into that party feeling like a ghost, my simple black dress a stark contrast to the glittering jewels of my mother's friends. My brother James, of course, presented our father with a vintage Patek Philippe watch. The crowd murmured in approval. I had brought a framed first edition copy of my dad's favorite book, which I'd spent weeks hunting down. When he unwrapped it, he gave a polite, distracted smile and set it aside, his eyes already on the gleaming watch. "Thank you, Amelia. Very thoughtful." The kiss of death. In my family, thoughtful was a consolation prize for things that had no monetary value. I tried to blend into the wallpaper when the clinking of a glass silenced the room. My father was standing by the fireplace, ready for his speech. He thanked everyone, his voice smooth and confident. He spoke of his legacy, of his pride in the Hamilton name. Then, his eyes found me across the room. A slow, pitying smile spread across his face. "As I look at my children," he began, "I am filled with such pride. I have a son who is a brilliant lawyer, a true partner. And I have a daughter," he continued, his voice taking on a jovial, mocking tone, "Amelia, who is learning valuable life lessons." The room chuckled uncomfortably. "She's discovering the world is a tough place, but these experiences, they build character. So let's raise a glass not just to success, but to character building." The room erupted in laughter. I stood there, frozen, a perfect smile painted on my face. Every eye was on me. I could feel their pity like a physical weight. My mother patted my arm, a gesture not of support, but of commiseration for my sad, little life. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The hurt didn't turn to tears. It froze. It hardened into something cold, sharp, and clear. I quietly set my untouched champagne down and slipped out the French doors into the cold night air. They thought they had buried me. They had no idea they had just planted a seed. That night, I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I drove back to my small apartment, the character-building joke echoing in my head, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis of their blindness. They weren't just disappointed in me. They were fundamentally incapable of seeing me for who I was. The air in my apartment felt different. It was no longer the space of my failure, filled with the ghosts of my dead startup. It was a blank slate, a sanctuary. My phone buzzed the next morning. My mother. I watched her name flash on the screen, a familiar pang of anxiety in my chest. But this time, I didn't answer. I just silenced it. Another call in the afternoon. My father. I silenced that one too. There was no angry text, no dramatic announcement of my departure. I just stopped. I unplugged myself from their world of judgment. They probably barely noticed at first, assuming I was licking my wounds, proving their point about my fragility. They couldn't have been more wrong. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. For 2 days, I did nothing but think. I paced the worn floor of my living room, the city lights painting patterns on the walls. On the 3rd day, I walked over to the large whiteboard on my wall, still covered in the frantic scribbles and failed projections of my last venture. I picked up an eraser and, with slow, deliberate strokes, I wiped it all away. The past, the mistakes, the humiliation. Gone. The surface was pristine, white, and full of potential. I uncapped a black marker. In the very center of the board, I wrote a single word: Phoenix. It was a promise to myself. This time, there would be no business plans shared over dinner. No hopeful updates for them to dismiss. My work, my progress, my ambition would exist entirely in the shadows. Their ignorance was no longer a source of pain. It was my greatest strategic advantage. I sat down at my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark room. My war wasn't against them. It was against their definition of me. And it was a war I had just decided I was going to win. The next 3 years of my life were a blur of caffeine and code. My world shrank to the 4 walls of my apartment. The sun would rise, painting the sky in colors I only saw reflected on my monitor, and it would set as I was just hitting my stride. I became a creature of the night, fueled by a relentless drive and the cheapest takeout I could find. My company, Phoenix, was my entire existence. It was my secret, my obsession, and my weapon. To my family, I had simply vanished into obscurity. They assumed I was working some menial dead-end job, living a small, sad life. I'd get the occasional text from my mother. "Just checking in, dear? Are you managing all right?" Or, "James and his wife are vacationing in the Alps. It looks lovely. I hope you're taking care of yourself." Each message was a small, condescending pat on the head. I'd reply with a simple, non-committal, "I'm fine, thanks," and get back to work. Little did they know, while James was skiing, I was closing a seed funding round with a venture capital firm in Berlin. Phoenix started to grow. First, it was the algorithm, a piece of predictive software so advanced it felt like magic. Then came the first client. I celebrated that win alone, with a slice of grocery store cake. I hired my first employee, a brilliant programmer from India I'd never met in person. Then another. We were a ghost team, scattered across the globe, connected by secure servers and a shared belief in what we were building. All of it was done under a veil of absolute secrecy. The company was registered through a series of holding firms. My name, Amelia Hamilton, was nowhere to be found. In the tech world, the founder of Phoenix was known only by a username, Nix. By the end of year 3, we weren't just a startup, we were a force. And then came the call, a multi-million-dollar contract with one of the largest e-commerce platforms in the world. A deal that would not just put us on the map, but redraw it entirely. As I hung up, the sun was rising. I looked at the whiteboard, at that single word, Phoenix. It was no longer just a promise. It was an empire in the making, and its queen was still completely invisible. After years of near silence, it arrived. Not a phone call, not a handwritten letter, but a thick, cream-colored envelope with an embossed family crest. Inside was a formal invitation to the 15th annual Hamilton Charity Ball, the glittering centerpiece of my mother's social calendar. My presence was requested. It wasn't an olive branch, it was a command performance. In their world, a missing child was a loose thread on an otherwise perfect tapestry, a public relations problem they needed to manage. They needed their failure on display, if only to prove their magnanimity in still claiming her as their own. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash. The thought of stepping back into that lion's den, of feeling their pitying stares and hearing their whispered judgments, made my stomach clench. I didn't need their approval anymore. Phoenix was thriving, expanding into Europe. I was Nyx, a name that commanded respect in circles they couldn't even imagine. So why go back? Driven by a strange curiosity, I pulled up the gala's website. It was a monument to my mother's taste, understated elegance and a list of Boston's elite. I scrolled down the page of corporate sponsors, banks, law firms, legacy brands, and then I saw it. The highest tier of sponsorship, the Visionary Partner Package, was still listed as available. A light bulb didn't just go on in my head. A supernova erupted. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They weren't inviting me to their event. They were inviting me to mine. The dread vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't a summons, it was an opportunity. The perfect stage. My hand went to my phone, but I didn't call my mother. I called my CFO. "Arthur," I said, my voice calm. "The Hamilton Charity Ball. I want the Visionary Partner sponsorship. Use the Aura Tech Holding Company. No one is to know the source until I say so." After the call, I filled out the RSVP with a steady hand. Amelia Hamilton will be attending. I sealed the envelope, imagining my mother's triumphant smile when she received it, thinking her lost lamb was coming back to the fold. She had no idea she wasn't inviting a lamb. She was inviting a wolf right to her door. The black sedan that pulled up to the hotel entrance was not a taxi or a rideshare. It was a sleek, custom Maybach that purred with an authority my father would have recognized, but never associated with me. The valet rushed to open my door. I stepped out, not as the defeated daughter they expected, but as someone else entirely. My dress wasn't the safe pale pink my mother had suggested in her helpful email. It was a deep emerald green, a sheath of silk that was both severe and elegant, by a designer so new and exclusive my mother wouldn't even know his name. My hair was pulled back, my makeup minimal. I wasn't decorated. I was armed. As I walked into the ballroom, I felt the shift. It was a subtle thing at first, a ripple in the sea of polite conversation. A head turned, then another. The string quartet seemed to hesitate for half a beat. This wasn't the Amelia they remembered, the quiet, awkward girl who tried too hard to please. This woman walked with a purpose. Her back was straight, her chin was high, and her eyes scanned the room, not with nervousness, but with assessment. The whispers started. "Is that Amelia Hamilton? My God, I didn't recognize her. What is she wearing?" I saw them instantly, holding court near the grand staircase. My mother's smile froze, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and sheer disapproval. My father glanced over, did a double-take, and then scoffed to the man next to him, a dismissive gesture that said, "See, always has to make a scene." But it was my brother James, who simply stared, a look of profound confusion on his face. He saw that this wasn't a costume. This was a different person. I didn't walk towards them. The old Amelia would have scurried over, desperate for approval. Instead, I glided toward the bar. I ordered a glass of water, feeling the weight of their collective stare. I let them watch. After a slow sip, I finally turned, my eyes sweeping past dozens of curious faces until they landed on my family. I raised my glass an inch in their direction, and a slow, enigmatic smile touched my lips. It was a smile that said nothing and everything. It wasn't a plea for acceptance. It was a promise. My enigmatic smile did its job. It was a challenge they couldn't ignore. After a moment of hushed conference, they began to move toward me, a royal procession cutting through the crowd. My mother led the charge, her own smile a perfect, polished weapon. My father followed, his expression a mask of paternal authority. My brother trailed behind, his face still a canvas of confusion. The whispers around me intensified as the Hamiltons prepared to deal with their rogue element. "Amelia, darling," my mother began, her voice a silken purr that couldn't hide its claws. "You decided to join us after all. We were beginning to worry." Her eyes raked over my emerald dress. "And what a statement piece you've chosen. So bold. It was a deviation from the family brand, a rebellion. "We've been so curious," she continued. "What have you been doing to keep yourself busy? Did you find a nice little job?" The condescension was suffocating. "It's good you're getting out," my father added, his voice booming. "The world isn't so easy without a safety net, is it?" The old me would have withered. I would have stammered, defended my choices, my very existence. But the old me was gone. I simply smiled back. "It's a beautiful party, Mother. You've outdone yourself." I turned to my father. "You're right, Dad. A safety net can be limiting. I've found it's more rewarding to build your own." To my mother's question about a job, I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. "I keep myself very busy, thank you. You could say I'm in the business of building things." The vagueness was a shield they couldn't penetrate. They stared, their collective script thrown into disarray. I was supposed to be apologetic or defensive. I was none of those things. I refused to play my part. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I see some people I must speak with. I'm sure we'll have more time to catch up later." And with a polite nod, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, bewildered, and for the first time, utterly powerless against me. Their whispers followed me, but for the first time, they sounded less like judgment and more like fear. An hour into the gala, the main program began. My father gave a speech, the mayor gave a speech. They spoke of legacy and community. I watched them from my table in the back, a calm observer. Then, my mother, Catherine, took the stage. She was in her element, the gracious host, the queen of Boston society. She began her speech, thanking the various corporate sponsors. She moved down the list, from the silver tier sponsors to the gold. "Our deepest thanks to Blackwood Financial," she said, as the company's logo appeared on the large screens behind her. "And to the Prescott Law Group." Polite applause followed each name. I took a slow sip of my water, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. My mother was getting closer. Her smile was radiant. She had no idea she was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of her own life. "And now," she said, her voice rising, "I would like to give a very special thank you to our visionary partner." The room leaned in. "Their record-breaking donation will allow us to build an entire new pediatric wing." She squinted slightly at the teleprompter, the name unfamiliar. "Our deepest gratitude to Aura Tech." The logo I had designed myself, a stylized phoenix wing, flashed onto the screens. The room applauded politely for the unknown company, but my mother wasn't finished. "Aura Tech's founder, who wishes to remain anonymous, has made a special request. Instead of honoring them, they have asked that we use this moment to recognize a young entrepreneur whose resilience and innovation embody the spirit of our city." My mother's eyes scanned the prompter, a flicker of confusion on her face. She looked up, her eyes finding mine in the crowd, a look of sheer disbelief before she turned back to the microphone. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Please join me in welcoming to the stage Ms. Amelia Hamilton." Silence. Not a quiet moment. A deafening void. The applause died as if switched off. 1,000 pairs of eyes darted from my mother on stage to my family's table and then to me. The entire universe of their perfect world tilted on its axis. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the silent room. I stood up, and I began to walk. My eyes were fixed on the stage and on the horrified, uncomprehending expressions of my mother and father as their failure walked calmly forward to claim her moment. As I walked, time seemed to stretch and warp. The 100 feet from my table to the stage became an eternity. Each step I took was a drumbeat in the suffocating silence. I could feel every eye in the room on me, but I didn't see them. My focus was a laser beam, locked on the front table, on the 3 people who had forged my identity in failure. And I watched their perfect world shatter in real time, frame by painful frame. My mother, Catherine, was the first to break. Her perfect hostess smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed horror. Her skin seemed to turn a pale, waxy white under the stage lights. Her hand, adorned with a heavy diamond ring, went to her pearls, a nervous gesture I hadn't seen since I was a child. This was her night, her triumph, and she was watching it get hijacked by the one person she had never considered a threat. Her eyes darted from me to her husband, then to the stunned faces of her society friends. I could see the calculation behind the panic, the social fallout, the questions, the loss of control. My father's reaction was different, slower. His shock was hardening into something far more dangerous: rage. He wasn't looking at me with pride. He was looking at me with the fury of a king whose authority had been challenged by a court jester. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. This wasn't success to him. This was insubordination. In his mind, I hadn't earned this. I had somehow stolen it. But it was James, my golden boy brother, who held my gaze the longest. His shock was a kaleidoscope of emotions. Disbelief, yes, but underneath it, a dawning understanding. I could see the gears turning in his sharp, legal mind, connecting the dots of my silence, my mysterious absence, my sudden confidence. He was realizing the sheer scale of their miscalculation. The failure they had pitied had been playing a different game, a game so far above their own, they never even saw the board. As I reached the stage, I took the microphone from its stand. I looked directly at their table, at my mother's horror, my father's fury, and my brother's shattered comprehension, and I let the silence hang for just one more second. My speech was short. I thanked Aura Tech for the honor and spoke for precisely 2 minutes about the nature of resilience. I never mentioned my family's name. I didn't have to. The moment I stepped off the stage, I was surrounded, not by the pitying faces I was used to, but by a crush of genuine curiosity and admiration. The CEO of a major bank, a woman my father idolized, was shaking my hand. A tech reporter was asking for a comment. For 10 minutes, I was held in an orbit of legitimate interest, and I could see my family from the corner of my eye, hovering at the edge of the circle, forced to wait their turn. The power dynamic had been inverted so completely, it was almost dizzying. When the crowd thinned, they pounced. The condescension was gone, replaced by a frantic, false warmth that was somehow more repulsive. "Amelia!" my father boomed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Incredible! I always knew you had it in you. This is what a Hamilton does. We build things." He was trying to rewrite history in real time, to absorb my independent success into the family mythology. "Darling, your speech was so poised," my mother gushed, grabbing my other arm. "Why did you keep this a secret? We could have helped. You know your father has connections." The irony was staggering. The woman who likely engineered my downfall was now offering to help. "We must have lunch this week." James just stood there looking pale. "That was something else, Amelia," was all he managed to say. I looked at their desperate, smiling faces and felt nothing. The anger had burned away, leaving only a calm, empty space where my need for their approval used to be. "Thank you, Father," I said, my voice even. I turned to my mother. "My schedule is rather full for the foreseeable future, but thank you." My polite, formal tone was a brick wall. It gave them nothing. Just then, my own assistant appeared at my side. "Ms. Hamilton, the car is ready." The title, Ms. Hamilton, hung in the air, a sign I was no longer just their daughter. I gave them a final polite nod. It was a lovely evening, and I walked away, leaving them standing alone, their frantic attempts to reclaim me failing in the most public way possible. I was almost at the door, the cool night air just a few feet away, when his voice cut through the thinning crowd. "Amelia." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I turned. My father stood there, my mother and brother flanking him. The false smiles were gone. His face was a thundercloud. "I want a word," he said, his voice low and tight with fury. "What was that in there? That whole performance? Was your goal to publicly humiliate your mother and me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time without a filter of fear or a desperate need for his love. "You think this was about you," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the near-empty hall. "That's always been the problem. You've always thought my life was a reflection or a rejection of yours. This wasn't about embarrassing you. This was about me finally refusing to be embarrassed by you. For 20 years, I lived under the weight of a single word you gave me: failure. You used it as a weapon to keep me small. You thought your love was something I had to earn, and the price was to become a paler version of my brother, a footnote in the Hamilton family story. But love isn't a transaction. I took a step closer. The joke you made at your 60th birthday party, that wasn't character building. It was just cruel. And in that moment, you gave me a gift. You set me free. You showed me with absolute clarity that your approval was a cage I had to escape. He was speechless. For the first time in his life, my father had no rebuttal. My mother had tears welling in her eyes. James was just looking at the floor. I didn't build my company to spite you, I said softly. I built it for me. I built it because I refused to accept your definition of my worth. I looked from my father to my mother to my brother. I'm not the failure in this story, Dad. The real failure was your inability to see your own daughter. And that's a legacy you'll have to carry all on your own. And with that, I turned around. I didn't look back. I walked out of the ballroom, out of the hotel, and into the rest of my life, leaving them behind with nothing but the echoing silence and the consequences of their actions. It's been 6 months since that night. I'm sitting in my office, the real headquarters of Phoenix, overlooking the city from the 40th floor. The space is minimalist, clean, and filled with light. It's a world away from the cramped apartment where my dream was born. The aftermath of the gala was quiet, not explosive. My father and I have not spoken. My mother sends occasional tentative emails asking about my well-being without making demands. It's a start. My brother James calls me every week. We're getting to know each other for the first time, not as the success and the failure, but just as a brother and a sister. It's awkward and it's healing. For a long time, I thought the goal was that moment at the gala, the look on their faces, the shock, the sweet revenge, and it was satisfying for a moment. But I've come to realize that wasn't the victory. The victory didn't happen in front of 1,000 people. It happened alone, in a dark apartment 3 years ago. The real victory was the moment I wiped that whiteboard clean. It was the moment I chose to believe in myself when no one else would. The success wasn't the money or the recognition. It was the quiet, steady peace that came from my own hard work. It was building a team that shares my vision, people who see me for my ideas, not my last name. They say living well is the best revenge, but I learned something more profound. True success isn't about revenge at all. It's not about proving your enemies wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's the freedom that comes when you stop needing their applause because you've finally learned to appreciate your own. The world will always try to give you a label, but you don't have to accept it. My name is Amelia, and for the first time in my life, that is the only label that matters. So I'll leave you with this question. Whose definition of you are you living by? And what would happen if you decided to write your own? Thank you for listening.